Have you ever thought about what the worst Star Wars movie is? Disney made it really hard for us to decide because of the garbage that is the sequel trilogy. At least The Force Awakens copied A New Hope so closely that it's actually passable, but it's really a toss-up between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. Both are so unbelievably terrible that there's a lot to take into consideration. Let's start with The Last Jedi. The biggest standout is the Holdo maneuver, which might be the single most absurd moment in Star Wars. I also hate that they added this to redeem Holdo, as if she was doing the right thing all along. And then there's the fact that they changed Luke Skywalker into a completely different character. Bro went from saving the galaxy to attempting murder on kids and drinking green titty milk, because that definitely makes sense. And let's not forget that Leia is able to survive a direct attack and fly through space. Leaving her dead was a huge missed opportunity in Kylo Ren's character development. Either Snoke needed to stay alive, or Leia had to stay dead. Kylo or Snoke should have been the main villain for the next movie. Instead, we got Palpatine returning. Rather than leave the original trilogy behind, Disney continued to lean on legacy characters. The most important problem with The Rise of Skywalker is that Rey becomes a full-fledged Mary Sue. All of a sudden, she is the chosen one, subverting Anakin's entire life's purpose. She has never seen before powers that normally would be totally non-canon. She can pull ships out of the sky and then zap them with lightning like she's Zeus. Oh yeah, and she can force heal, because that's definitely always been a thing. It just so happens that she's self-taught too, because Qui-Gon, one of the wisest Jedi ever, who practically invented being a Force ghost, couldn't think of that to try to save himself. Rey takes up so much space in the movie that everyone else becomes unimportant. Finn, for example, becomes nothing more than a side character, who exists only to enlist horses to run on Star Destroyers. Kylo Ren is nothing more than the sniveling man-child he's always been, existing only to get beat over the head by Rey as much as physically possible. And then it turns out he likes Rey, so he just kisses her and sacrifices himself, just like that. But hey, it's all sunshine and rainbows because Palpatine is defeated, and Rey completes her destiny as the chosen one, even though she's Palpy's daughter, which isn't weird in the slightest. And keep in mind, all of this happens in a span of 24 hours, with the Resistance being hardly more than a couple hundred people against thousands and thousands of Star Destroyers that can each destroy an entire planet. Oof. Okay, now that I think about it, The Rise of Skywalker is clearly the worst. The Last Jedi will take the 10th spot on this list. Some would say that The Last Jedi is worse because it directly caused the dumpster fire coming after it, but let's be honest here. This all really started with the 9th movie on my list, The Force Awakens. I totally understand if you like this movie. After all, it's practically a modern remake of Episode 4, with amazing special effects and cinematography. But like I said before, so many aspects of this movie are one for one with A New Hope. The general story goes like this. There's a powerful kid on a desert planet who eventually meets Han Solo, and Han brings them to the rebellion/resistance, and there's a planet-killing weapon to destroy. The movie also wastes one of the only unique characters it brought to Star Wars, Finn. A stormtrooper deserter with PTSD who wants nothing to do with either side is a really compelling story. It could have been an awesome, complex narrative, but by the end of the movie, he's all in with the Resistance, and he exists primarily for obnoxious comic relief. And don't get me started on Kylo Ren. For the first half of the movie, he'd been built into a pretty solid villain. The village massacre at the beginning made Kylo look super cool, but it turns out that in a matter of days or weeks, some nobody from Jakku has completely eclipsed his powers and skill, and it only took a ragtag group of fighters to destroy a weapon that just killed billions and billions of people in an entire star system. If it was that easy, why didn't the Republic do something sooner? Plus, The Force Awakens was the monster that spawned the entire disaster that is the sequel trilogy, so I'm gonna always hate it for that. Anyway, I digress. Let's go all the way back to the very beginning where it all started with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. This movie had the unfortunate fate of having to set up the prequel trilogy. That meant introducing us to a lot of boring stuff, like the political state of the Republic and the dichotomy between it and the Trade Federation. But that doesn't mean it had to introduce it in a boring way, which is exactly what the movie did. The Phantom Menace might have the worst pacing out of any Star Wars movie. The pod race, as cool as it is, takes up a ton of time in the movie, not to mention all the preparation time and just sitting around on Tatooine. Granted, they needed the money from the pod race to buy an engine for Padme's ship, but the entire arc itself takes way too much time. Throughout the movie, there's just a lot of talking and planning going on, with the same concepts being rehashed over and over. In the final battle in particular, you jump from the Duel of the Fates to a 9-year-old goofing off in a starfighter to Jar Jar Binks falling over on the battlefield. Jar Jar ruins the movie with everything he touches. His dialogue is annoying enough, but he's a certified klutz. From stepping in poop to sticking his hand into a pod racer, this man's stupidity knows no bounds. Considering how serious the rest of the movie is, the type of comic relief that's supposed to be coming from Mr. Binks is totally off-putting. The dialogue in general is just weird with this movie. The Nemoidians are super hard to understand. The Jedi and the people from Naboo are trying to be Shakespearean. Then there's Anakin, who's just an average kid from the 90s, and the Gungans as a whole are in a whole league of their own. To cap it off, the two most interesting characters in the movie, Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul, get taken out in the final duel. Attack of the Clones objectively has a lot more issues that detract from the viewing experience, but for me, that just makes the whole movie better. For example, the awful writing is hilarious to me. Episode 2 is the funniest of all the movies in my opinion. Whether it's lines like, "I don't like sand, it's coarse and rough," or Samuel L. Jackson sneaking up on Count Dooku just to say, "This party's over." There's something to laugh at in almost every scene. I could go on and on. The movie is plagued by a lot of the same issues as The Phantom Menace, especially the pacing, but Attack of the Clones does do a better job with the stakes. While there is way too much time devoted to Anakin and Padme on Naboo, it's a vital plot device for Anakin's turn, and while that's going on, the mystery of discovering the clone army is engaging, and that Obi-Wan's life is in danger once he's captured. My biggest bias towards this movie is that I'm a sucker for the Clone Wars. I absolutely love seeing Anakin and Obi-Wan on screen together. We get introduced to Hayden's Anakin for the first time, and while he's annoyingly written at times, I genuinely think he plays a convincing teenager who's just trying to deal with a million things coming at him at once. Count Dooku as a figurehead for the Separatists is a way better villain than the Trade Federation. His introduction as a nuanced character is spot on. It shows that the Republic is far from perfect, and maybe, just maybe, Dooku's actually right. This movie also has one of the best end scenes in all of Star Wars, and if you don't remember it, I highly suggest you go rewatch it. One Star Wars movie I rewatched again and again is Solo. It's definitely the easiest to watch out of any Star Wars movie, and the most enjoyable. Han Solo is such a great character, and while sometimes it's better to leave someone's backstory untouched, I really liked how Ron Howard went about doing Han's. Sure, a lot of the movie is cliche, with the usual tropes like how Han and Chewie got their names, how Han got the Falcon, and so on. I think they may have crammed too much of the important stuff in Han's life into a very short period. There are also some things we had to take for granted, like that somehow Han understood the Wookiee language when he met Chewbacca, or that L3 was somehow able to navigate the Kessel Run. I specifically don't like that one because it negates how special Han is and the novelty of the Falcon. Those nitpick things aside, I think the movie is great. The flow of the movie is awesome, jumping from one new fast-paced event to the next, but it's not so insanely fast that it actually detracts from the film, like The Rise of Skywalker. Having a relatively low-stakes adventure about stealing some coaxium to pay off a crime syndicate is refreshing in a universe filled with galactic-sized wars. And yeah, I know that it's in the name, Star Wars, but that doesn't limit the franchise to just big-scale battles, and Solo is a testament to that. Now, a quick disclaimer before I talk about the next movie on my list. This ranking is strictly my own opinion based on how much I enjoyed them. I'm trying to take some objectivity into consideration, but at the end of the day, it's all about how fun and entertaining the movie is for me. That's why I chose to put Return of the Jedi at the number 5 spot on this list. Don't get me wrong, I still love this movie like all of the originals, but aside from the final showdown with Luke's temptation and Vader's redemption, I think this movie kind of falls flat. Hear me out. Don't let nostalgia cloud your vision, Padawan. First of all, the first act of Jabba's palace basically takes up an entire third of the movie, which is just way too long considering all the other important material this movie had to cover. Despite the grimy and colorful crowd at Jabba's palace, it's really not that interesting. Tatooine is already a location we've spent extensive time on earlier in A New Hope, and the interior of Jabba's palace resembles the Mos Eisley Cantina scene in a lot of ways. And don't get me started on the Jedi Rocks song. Afterward, Luke goes back to Dagobah, which is yet another retread without a new planet or new material. The only truly new place we get introduced to in Return of the Jedi is Endor, which is hampered by the Ewoks. I think the Ewoks are pretty cool myself, but there's no denying that they're just there to cater to kids, and they can get pretty annoying sometimes. Honestly, it's conceivable that the Ewoks, who knew the Force better and outnumbered the Empire, could give them a run for their money. But Endor is the largest, most pivotal battle in the Galactic Civil War. All of the Rebellion's forces were there, and the majority of the Empire's navy was there too. It's clear that there were more Rebel troops on Endor, as referenced in the Battlefront 2 campaign, but the movie makes it seem as if the Ewoks were the main fighting force saving the Rebellion. Considering the stakes, it cheapens the strength and the ability of the Rebel Alliance, who have to put everything they've got into this battle for a chance to save the galaxy. I know I'm only saying things I dislike about this movie instead of speaking about the good, but I hope it's implied that this movie is amazing as being the conclusion to the original trilogy. Those things just detract from the viewing experience for me. Next up is the movie that started everything. Episode 4 is coming in at number 4 on my list. The most important thing about A New Hope is that it's the first. Without it, we wouldn't have the Star Wars saga as we know it today. Just imagine if we never got to meet Anakin Skywalker and Padme, or the clone troopers and AT-ATs. My life would be much less fun. No, but seriously, we owe a lot to this movie, and it wouldn't have been able to do what it did if it wasn't a genuinely amazing movie all around. Put yourself in the shoes of an average person in the 70s. Star Wars must have been like nothing you'd ever seen before. The Mos Eisley Cantina, for example, featured so much variety between different alien species. Other sci-fi movies paled in comparison to the costuming featured here. Or the Death Star. Who had ever thought of a weapon the size of a literal moon that could blow up planets at the push of a lever? And then there's the story itself, which works beautifully as a standalone movie, following Luke in a classic zero-to-hero story that's shown in a completely new way. It seemingly drops us in the middle of a story, with Leia's ship being chased by the Devastator. All of the necessary elements are explained to the viewer, but we're still left to wonder at this vast universe with the unresolved conflict raging within it. From the start, the film moves from scene to scene with a clear and direct purpose. There's never any filler. Either a new character is being introduced or the story is moving smoothly along. There's very few cuts to random subplots or different battles. In the Battle of Yavin, for example, it's 15 minutes of straight fighting with no interruptions, and it's awesome. Nostalgia aside, there's almost a magical fairy tale aura to it. Seeing the action unfold, which far surpassed any other movie of its time, with laser blasters and mini starfighters, is really an experience completely unto itself. Now granted, when comparing this movie to the later Star Wars movies, I can see why some people think it's the worst of the originals. If we're being honest with ourselves, A New Hope hasn't aged very well. The duel between Vader and Obi-Wan is a prime example of this. It really just looks like some old guys fighting with sticks. The acting in some parts is arguably subpar as well. Leia gets over Alderaan being destroyed very quickly, and even her reaction in the moment seems unrealistic. Luke doesn't show much emotion when his family is literally burning in front of him, or when his mentor Obi-Wan dies at the hands of Vader. This movie was definitely Mark Hamill's weakest performance. The effects haven't aged very well either, but we have to remember that the special effects for the movie were unlike anything ever seen before at the time. It was revolutionary in every way. That's why it's important to view A New Hope with some blinders on, and try not to compare it to the later movies that much. Unfortunately, that's my job for the sake of this video, so in my attempt to be as objective as possible, I think this is a good spot for the original. Alright, now we're moving into the top 3. These are the definitive best Star Wars movies of all time, at least in my opinion. I hope you at least partially agree with me, and if you don't, be sure to let me know in the comments. And since we just covered episode 4, I think it's only right to follow up with its sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, in the number 3 spot. What makes episode 5 so great is how it pivots in a completely different direction from A New Hope. There's no retreading at all whatsoever. Everything is brand new, broadening our view of the galaxy far, far away. Where A New Hope was, well, hopeful, Empire is darker. It shows the cruelty and the brutality that the rebellion is facing. Where the Force was but a mystery, more details are being uncovered, particularly through Yoda. Where lightsabers were only laser swords wielded by space wizards, they are now weapons of the Jedi and the Sith. We get to meet more new characters to continue the story, each a force in their own right. Lando, Boba Fett, and Yoda is a great short list. This movie is so important for the original trilogy because, well, it's just like real life. The bad guys do win sometimes, and the heroes are not perfect. Luke's decision-making is flawed. Han's past comes back to haunt him, and Leia isn't sure how to lead while being infatuated with a scoundrel. And of course, just like A New Hope, Empire is revolutionary with visual effects in its own way. The Battle of Hoth is extremely impressive with the numerous AT-ATs and snowspeeders. It was yet another one-of-a-kind experience for its time. But above all else, the movie continues Vader's development into the greatest villain of all time. His interactions with his officers, whether it's choking out Ozzel or threatening Piet, or how he toys with Luke in their duel, exemplifies his ruthlessness and sheer power. And how can I forget the huge reveal at the end, where Vader reveals that he's Luke's father. As a viewer who has only just seen A New Hope before The Empire Strikes Back, this scene is really cool. Luke seems to know deep down that Vader's telling the truth, but is Vader just lying to manipulate him into joining his side? Or could it be? Overall, The Empire Strikes Back is the perfect Star Wars movie in terms of completeness. Now, I don't want to speak blasphemy to you guys, but I do believe that Rogue One is an even more perfect movie than Episode 5, and that's because of how Rogue One feels just like one of the original films, but without the retro dialogue and effects. You might be wondering what I mean by that. Basically, there's none of the corniness and silliness we see with the originals. The movie takes on a serious tone, but with appropriate humor from K2SO. With that serious tone, the movie explores the fact that not everyone in the rebellion is a heroic knight in shining armor. There's nuance. Some have dark pasts. Others are willing to do unspeakable things to fight the Empire. The movie deals with regular people, which only makes it better in my opinion. The villain, for example, may not be a Dark Lord of the Sith, but that doesn't make him any less compelling. Okay, I'll go ahead and admit it. I'm a huge director Krennic Glazer. He's a regular guy with a working class background who has worked his way up through the ranks by sheer willpower and ambition with the skills he had. But over time, clearly, his motivations have changed. He could care less about serving the Empire or protecting others from the rebellion. Krennic, by the time of Rogue One, has reached a point where he wants nothing else except to further himself by any means necessary, which makes him one of the most evil of all. Like I said, Rogue One is great in so many different ways. Still don't believe me? Let's start with Rogue One's resume. There's a lot of bests in this movie, and I think you'll have a hard time arguing against it. For starters, Scarif is far and away the best battle in all of Star Wars, combining land and space battles in a visually stunning spectacle. Along with that, I have to mention that Rogue One has one of the best visual effects packages of any Star Wars movie. You might think the best visual effects in Star Wars would be from a movie like The Rise of Skywalker, which for all of its flaws looked really great. The thing is, for me, The Rise of Skywalker or The Last Jedi's effects just make them look like any other big budget action movie, like Avengers Endgame or something. Instead, Rogue One utilizes that modern CGI while preserving the feeling of the original trilogy. Everything looks and seems as if it's exactly from A New Hope. That's what gave us iconic moments like the Vader hallway scene, which is definitely the best Star Wars scene of all time. It's really the only time you get to see Vader be himself on the big screen. I get chills every time I watch it. The movie doesn't hold back for the sake of children, showing us the real, gritty side of the galactic civil war. The big-name heroes and Jedi are not a factor in the slightest. I think that's a big reason why the characters are so relatable in this movie. I found myself truly invested into Jyn and Cassian very early on into the movie. You desperately want them to succeed despite knowing how dire the circumstances are. Alright, but enough about Rogue One. I know you've noticed by now that there's only one movie I haven't talked about yet, and it's obviously Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which is the best Star Wars movie of all. If you're a prequels fan like me, this movie is probably at the top of your list. But I also know there's a lot of you that would put The Empire Strikes Back or any of the originals at the top instead. So let me explain myself. Sure, Revenge of the Sith has a lot of flaws. The dialogue, for example, has nearly as many meme-worthy moments as Attack of the Clones. The movie takes out Dooku only to throw in Grievous as his replacement, who also gets killed really quickly. Some might even say that the movie rushes Anakin's turn to the dark side. Any of those are valid concerns, and I still believe we need the 4-hour cut for this movie to truly get the full experience. We could have gotten subplots like Palpatine leading Anakin to believe that Padme was cheating on him with Obi-Wan, or more scenes establishing Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship like the Clone Wars show did. But ultimately, the purpose of this movie was to complete the third act of Anakin Skywalker's life and show us his turn to the dark side. I think Revenge of the Sith did that really well. The way he gradually pushes away everyone he loves to the point where he only listens to Sidious's instruction is absolutely crushing, especially knowing how good of a man Anakin was. Sure, he had his flaws, but anyone can do terrible things when they've become isolated from loved ones and put in the echo chamber away from reality. One good thing about Anakin's fall, though, is that we get to enjoy the best duel in all of Star Wars, and probably the best sword-style fight in all of cinema. The duel of the heroes is just insane. There's really no other way to put it. Utilizing the volcanic landscape of Mustafar is just so unique, and it feels so real. As cringe as it might be to hear Vader yell, you can't help but think about Anakin being trapped in there, filled with all of that anger, hate, and sorrow, realizing that he'd been manipulated into throwing away everything he had. And to cap it all off, we get one of the best endings to any Star Wars movie, showing the darkness of Padme's death and the construction of the Death Star against the hopeful beginning of Leia's life on Alderaan and Luke's life underneath the binary sunset. And if you like this video, you should definitely check out the one on the screen right now. I know you'll love it.